Hello everyone. The title of this session is Feature Server Syncing with Name Branch Versions. My name is Gary McDougall. In this session, we're going to discuss syncing with name branch versions to give you some background information. Then we'll go into some demos. We'll go into a description of data preparation and publishing. We'll talk about deploying and syncing with offline mobile editors. We'll also go through and demo some scripts for managing your replica versions and finish up with a review of some help resources that you can use for further information. Feature server syncing with name branch versions is new in 10.8.1 and ArcGIS Pro 2.6. It builds upon sync with branch version data on default, which we released in ArcGIS Enterprise 10.7. Now it's similar to syncing with name versions with traditional versioning. However, there are some key differences, and those will come to light as we go through the presentation. It supports the same clients as other sync workflows, so the nice thing here is that you don't need to upgrade your clients to do these workflows. In ArcGIS Enterprise 10.8.1, you now have two options for version creation with sync. The first is called version creation equals none. That's the same as you currently have starting at 10.7. That's where the default version is used for sync. The new option is the version per downloaded map. What this does is it uses this version every time offline data is synchronized. With version creation equal to none, the sync goes directly against the default branch version. So you can see in the diagram in the slide, you've got a couple of offline editors, and when they sync, they're uploading and downloading edits directly from default. Now, when would you want to use this option? Well, one option is to use it for your mobile editing workflows. However, one requirement is that the default version be public. This is because the mobile editors need to be able to apply edits directly to default to sync their changes. For a lot of customers, that's a non-starter because they like to publish their default as protected. For them, for mobile editing workflows, the next option that we discuss, the version per downloaded map, may be a better way to go. Now, there is an exception to this. In ArcGIS Enterprise 10.8.1, we added a new privilege called Manage Versions. What that does is it allows users with the privilege to do version management operations, such as reconcile and post other people's versions, delete versions, and so forth. And one of the things it allows is you to sync to protected default. So imagine this scenario. You've got some regular field editors. Maybe they're going to use the version per download map option, which we'll discuss next. But then you also have some supervisors in the field. When there's an emergency situation, they may need to get edits directly into default. For them, they can take data offline and sync directly to default since they have this manage versions privilege. Another workflow where you want to use version creation equals none is when you're working with read-only clients. That's because the download of the edits, whether it be version creation equals none or version creation equals version per downloaded map, both come off of the default version. So there's no advantage of going with the other option. So the second option is version per downloaded map. And that is ideal for working with mobile editing workflows. The way it works is that a branch version is created as each mobile editor takes data offline. And this allows you to keep default as protected. During the synchronization, edits are uploaded and applied to the branch version, not default. That way, default can remain as protected. Edits, though, that are downloaded to the mobile clients come off of the default version. And we'll discuss what that means as we go further through the presentation. Now, the advantage of this operation is that the edits are uploaded to a branch version and therefore can be reviewed prior to posting to default and making available to everyone else in the organization that can see default. One thing to note is that this option requires replica tracking. Replica tracking is a new enhancement on top of the archive within branch versions. And what it does is it keeps track of which replicas have done which edits, and it's needed for the workflows that we're about to describe. If you used version creation equals to none, you do not need to enable replica tracking on your data. Now let's get into some data flow patterns, and these are important to understand how things work with the version per downloaded map option. So the first thing we're going to discuss is the requirement to reconcile before sync in order to download edits. So to start, we have a mobile editor, and they've taken data offline, and you can see a version, RV2, has been created for them. Now, the mobile editor makes edit 12 prime in the field, and someone back in the office makes edit 11 prime on default. On the next step, the mobile editor calls sync. What that's going to do is it's going to upload 12 prime to the replica version, but it's not going to download 11 prime. That's because we didn't reconcile prior to sync. Now let's see what happens on reconcile. On reconcile, edit 11 prime becomes visible to version RV2 and is now available for download on the next sync. As we stated before, edits are always downloaded from default, and 11 prime is part of default. Notice here I did a reconcile, but I did not post. I didn't post because edit 12 prime is still under review and not ready to be posted to default. However, this does not prevent me from reconciling. Next, the client calls sync and edit 11 prime is downloaded. Now let's talk a bit about how sync works here. To determine the edits to download, the sync first finds where the replica version is referencing default. As you can see, it is right here. It then gets all the changes from there to where the client reports it last downloaded changes, which is right here. It is these changes that are used for the download. Okay, let's go to the second data flow, and that's the requirement to post in order to share edits. In this case, we'll continue where we left off in the last data flow. So edit 12 prime is in my replica version, and an editor in the office makes a further edited 12 prime because there's some change that needs to be adjusted there, and they make edit 12 double prime. Now, if the client were to sync at this point, 12 double prime would not be downloaded to the client. That's because we didn't reconcile before we synced, but even if we did do a reconcile, 12 double prime still wouldn't be downloaded because it's not yet been posted to default. So in the next step, the editor in the office reconciles and posts this time 12 double prime to default. And as you can see now, 12 double prime is available on default. So then on the next sync, 12 double prime is downloaded to the client. Okay, now let's get into some demos. The first demo we're going to show is version per downloaded map. So I'm going to go into my application on one of my machines, and you'll see I'm connected to some hydrant inspection data. On the right, you'll see I have an enterprise geodatabase connection. And if I go to the connection properties, you'll see it's set up as a branch version connection. So this is branch version data, and I dropped it into a pro map, set the symbology, and now I'm ready to publish it as a feature service. Now something else to note, I've added a validation rule onto this data. And to do that, I went to my design, picked attribute rules, and then created a rule of type validation. And basically it just checks to make sure that my operable field is not set to null. I want it to be either true or false, and I don't want a client accidentally setting it to null in the field. It's a very simple example of a rule. You can add lots of other types of rules to check your data, but we'll see how that comes into play later on in the demos. So that's also why I have these validation layers in my map, because I want to publish with that validation rule and validation service running. Okay, so now I'm ready to publish. I'm going to pick share. I'm also connected to my portal as the admin and my GM10 portal. So I'm going to publish to it. So I'm going to click the sharing as web layer option. And I'm going to set a summary and tags. It could be anything. I'm going to make it a feature service. Then I'm going to come to configuration, and I want to turn on version management and validation because I want to do validation, and I also want to be able to access the branch versions over the web through my feature service. Now, in addition, it's required that I publish it as dedicated, so I'll pick that option. Whenever you enable version management and validation, you need to have it dedicated. Now I'll go to my feature service, and I'm going to enable sync. When I enable sync, you'll see there's a new section down here in Pro 2.6. This is where you pick the version creation option. So you can see it's none by default, but in this case, I want to use the new create a version per downloaded map option. So now I'm going to click Analyze, and this is going to check the data, make sure everything's good to go. So let's see what it does. It's going through and checking my layers, and look, it comes up with a validation error, or with an analyzer error. The error basically says that I need, for the version for each downloaded map option, I need to have replica tracking enabled. So to do that, I can just run the replica tracking command. Now I've enabled replica tracking on all the other data sets. I just left this one ready to enable just to show you the process. So I can type in enable replica tracking, run my tool, and then I just need to drop the class in. In this case, it's my hydrants 1 data, and click run. And this will configure the archive inside the branch to have that additional metadata so I can record which replicas I've made which edits. Okay, so that's enabled. So now I can come back and I can reanalyze, and that error should go away. Now, I don't need this layer. I just did this to show how to enable replica tracking. So I'm going to remove it from the map. And now I'm ready to publish. So I've already published this service. I just kind of wanted to show you the process. So I don't have to go through publishing right now. But I will show you on my enterprise. I've logged into the home app, and you will see my hydrants data published, and I've shared it with the organization. So all members of the organization can log in and see this service. Now, in addition to that, I set up some users. So I click on organization and I look at the members within my organization. You'll see that I have 5 members. I've got the admin user, who I'm currently logged in as. I've also got a UC user 1, UC user 2, and UC user 3, which will be my field editors. And then I have this other user called man versions. This user has the manage versions setting. So to set that up, what I did is I went into settings and I created a new member role. So I clicked create role, gave it a name, and give it a description. I chose to select an existing role as sort of a base. So I'm going to pick publisher. And then I'm going to scroll down and go to version management and enable the manage versions privilege. Click save, then come back to my members and assign them the role, which I've already created before. Okay, so now that we have all that in place, let's go and take some data offline and show that workflow. So I'm going to log out as admin, and I'm going to log back in as my man versions user. So I'm going to log in, and you'll see now that I'm logged in as man versions. And I'm going to set up kind of like a side-by-side view here. Bear with me for a minute. So on the left side, I have my feature service logged in as man versions. And on the right side, I have another session I'm setting up here. And on this side, I'm logged in as UC user 1. So I'm going to go through a workflow where I'm going to take data offline as UC user 1, and then we're going to see what's happening version management wise on the left side of the screen. Now, if I click on, as you see, this is the connected to my STE database, this map. So I'm going to open another map. Let me just open another map here. That is pointing to my feature service data. Let me get the map back. Okay, so this is my feature service data. It's just taking a second to draw. And if I click on the database icon, click on my feature service, and then I go to my versions, you'll see that I've got a couple of additional versions. These were created by my UC User 2 and UC User 3 users. I've already taken data offline and actually synced edits for those two. And now in this workflow, I'm going to do the same for UC User 1. Now you can tell by the naming convention that these are replica versions because our naming convention includes the username, the service, and a unique identifier. Okay, so right now I'm logged in as my man versions user. I'm connected to default. And we're going to zoom right in and focus on this Naperville Country Club area for the demos. Okay, so I'm going to start on this side where I'm logged in as user 1. In my map, I've got my feature service. Right click on this guy, you can see I'm connected to the feature service. And I'm ready to take the data offline. So I'm going to click offline download map. And so what this is going to do is it's going to create a copy locally onto this machine. Now in this presentation, I happen to be using Pro as the client, but I could just as easily use Collector or some other custom application that works with offline data. So this is now downloading. And as that's running, we can take a look on this side as the man versions user to take a look at the versions that are getting created. So you see there's a version already created for UC User 1 that's going to be associated with that user's replica. So that's already done on the server side. It's just downloading to the client, switching the map references. Okay, so if we look here, we're now connected to a geodatabase. We're not connected to the feature service anymore. Of course, if I zoom out a little bit, you'll see that it's just taken this subset offline. And now I'm ready to make some edits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a very simple edit because I want to be able to make it easy for you to follow the data flow. And I'm just going to change this hydrant from being assigned to completed. And that'll change it to being red. And then I'll just save that edit. And now I'm going to synchronize. So I'm going to go to my map. I'm going to pick sync. So what this is going to do is it's going to upload that edit and apply it to the replica version on the server. So as the synchronization is happening, we can monitor what's going on the server side. If I hit refresh here, you'll see that the data hasn't changed. And that's good because I'm looking at the default version. Okay, that synchronization is complete. Let me refresh again. And again, you don't see any edits coming in. That's good because I'm looking at the default version. All right, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an edit in default. So I'm going to go to edit. I'm going to select a feature. And I'm going to make an edit to it. I'm just going to mark it as completed, also make it red. Save that edit. Okay, so now you see, I have this edit in default, and I have this other edit that I made that I uploaded to the replica version. So if I want to download this edit from default, I need to, of course, reconcile before the next sync, like we talked about before. So let's do that. Let me change versions. I'm going to change to the UC User 1's version. And you'll see the edit that was just uploaded here. And now I'm going to reconcile. So I'm going to go to my versions. I'm going to reconcile. And that'll complete. And then once it's reconciled, you'll see that edit from default show up here. And that tells me that it's available for download. It's accessible. So there it is. In this case, I'm going to come back. Now I'm just going to call sync from the mobile editor. And now you'll see that that edit is going to be downloaded. Like we had showed before in the slides, with that rule, you need to reconcile before sync. Because we followed that rule, we'll get that new edit downloaded. Okay, so while that's going on, let's talk about the next step. In the next step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the role of a QA editor on the server, and I'm going to update that hydrant that was just uploaded. You can see the sync completed now, and I have all the edits on the mobile client. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to go to this feature that was edited by the mobile client, and say I don't like the changes that were in there, and I want to reassign it. I want to make it an unassigned and picked up by another field editor so they can redo the work. So I'm going to set it to be unassigned, and that's going to change it to be blue. Now these edits are in the replica version, right? Because I'm reviewing the edits. Like we said in the slides, in order to share this with everyone, I need to post it. So say I'm happy with the change, I'm ready to post it. I can then go to my versioning tab, reconcile, because of course you have to reconcile before you're allowed to post. And now I'll post. And the changes are now posted. So now I can come back here and call sync. Now prior to that post, if I had called sync, that blue hydrant would not have been downloaded. I would have not gotten any changes down. But because I posted, it's now going to show up. Okay, that's completed now, and we see that blue hydrant now showing up. So with that, we've finished our first demo. Now let's go on to the next. Okay, for our next demo, we're going to go and talk about scripting. So we have a script that we're going to go through and show how we can automate some of these processes, because these are ideal processes to automate. Okay, so in the last demo, I showed how there already are a couple of versions that were pre-created on the system from other replica users. So if we go back here under our man versions user, we go and we switch versions, you'll see that if I switch to the user 2 version, you'll see that one of the hydrants has been changed to red. If I switch to version 3, you'll see another one of the hydrants has been changed to red. So what I want to do is kind of run a script to reconcile and post all these things and have them available for download for all the clients. So let's go into our machine here, and I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to go to my web browser. And you'll see that we're going to provide a automate reconcile and post operations for sync enabled branch version data sample. And this includes a script that goes through the process that we want to do to merge all those edits. So in this demo, we're going to run through that. So I'm going to bring up my Wing IDE that includes the script. So let's start by running it, and we'll talk about what it's doing as we go through it. So the first thing it's doing is it's going to go connect to my portal. So if we scroll to the top of the script, we'll see that it's set up to connect to my hydrant service on my GM10 server and connect as my man versions user. And also it sets up some logging. So as it goes through these processes, it logs information that you can then later check out. So the first thing it does is sign in. So let's go through that step. Okay, the next thing it does is it queries the replica resource to find out all the replica versions that that are available that are associated with active replicas. And this is new in 10.8.1. So if you go to the replicas resource and say return version equals true, it's not only going to return you the name and replica ID, but it's also going to return the replica version, which we can then extract in this call. Next, it's going to go through and it's going to get the full replica information for each of those replica versions that we got in the previous step and see if these versions need to be evaluated. Now, before I had showed you that there are validation rules on the data, this is where this kicks in. So what we're going to do here is we're going to kick off those validation rules. And if they pass, then we know that it's okay to post the contents of the version. But if they don't pass, then we're not going to post them, and we're going to put them in the report as something to be evaluated later. Now, the first thing we need to do is to figure out, well, should we evaluate the contents of the versions? So if the evaluation date is, if the modified date is none, that means that no one's made any edits to that version, so we can just skip that one. And then the next thing we check is to see, well, when was the last time it was validated? If it's been edited since it's last been validated, well, then we do want to definitely include it. So that's what happens in that block of code. So I'll just run through that. Now, all of the versions, the 3 replica versions that we have, are going to be on the list because all of them have been edited since the last validation. Okay, so next we go into a loop, and this goes through and it does an evaluate on each of the versions. So I'm going to put a block here, and I'm going to run through the first one, and you'll see that it does an evaluate, and it calls into the validation server and does an evaluate, and then we check the result, and we see if it's false, and let's see if it's false. And I skipped through that one. Let's go to the next one. Sorry. Let me just step over that. And you'll see that it's actually true, because if it had been false, it would have fallen out here. So we're going to log some information about it. Okay, so I'll let that continue for the final one and get to the last block of code. So the last block of code does a rec and post of the versions. So we can see that to this point, all of them have passed validation and all of them are ready to be reconciled and posted. Now the true means that we're going to rec and post. Now, one thing to note is that this script does a last in wins workflow. So if there's conflicts, we're just going to go in favor of the version of the changes, and that's just our default mode. And that's fine because we've evaluated the contents, we know it's good, and we're okay with posting that. Okay, so I'm going to go through and do a rec and post of all the versions. That's calling into that rec and post to your processing tool. And once that's completed, we'll go to the next breakpoint. So the next breakpoint does a second round of rec and post, except this time we only reconcile. Now the reason we do this is that as you're going through each version and you're reconciling and posting, the first one that you've posted, it doesn't know about edits that were posted by later versions. So we do another round just so that the earlier versions can pick up the changes in default from the later versions. So I'm just going to run through that. And with that, I'm complete. So I'll just run through the end and my script is done. So let's come back here and let's go into the live version of our data. Here I'm again connected as my man versions user. I'm looking at my feature service. And if I now refresh the version, I'm currently connected to user 3's version, you'll see that all the edits are now visible to this version. So when user 3's offline user syncs, they're going to get all of these edits. And that same goes for the other users as well. So let's go back to our user 1 and let's sync. So this will now pull down the edits to these 2 hydrants because those were pulled in from the script to default and made available for us to download. All right, so there's the edits. So you can see how you can set up a script like that to run regularly. And then what it does is it really cuts down on the need for you to manually inspect these versions and rec and post them. And you can see here's some of the scripting logs that script created. And it kind of goes through things like, has logs about the reconcile and post. There's also evaluation logs, um, and lots of other information in here. And had any of these failed validation, it would also list those as well. Okay, so let's go back to the slides one last time. And I'll show some help topic references. If you go to this help link, which you can get to using the QR code shown here, you'll see some topics including work with offline maps and branch version data, which goes through much of what was shown in this session. So if you're looking for more information, that's the place to go. The prepare data for offline use topic also has some recent updates that you'll want to review. And that concludes this session. Hope everyone has a great Dev Summit.